that's become a mainstream narrative. It's not as crazy as it once sounded. 250K this year, totally possible. The volatility has dampened dramatically. I think it used to be about 3 times as volatile in the S&P. Now it's less than 2 times as volatile in the S&P. And Bitcoin is sort of like the benchmark. You know, if we had to make a comparison, maybe you say that's owning the S&P, you know, the SPY as an index. You know, your savings account is Bitcoin, and then you use dollars when you need to.
Crypto markets are reaching a pivotal moment this week as Bitcoin surpassed 104,000 a coin again amidst heightened volatility. Ethereum is back up above $2,600. The industry is abuzz with Coinbase now joining the S&P 500. Which is the first of its kind. And also Galaxy Digital is going public today as we speak on the 16th of May. Scott Melker is here to discuss with us crypto news and what's next for the crypto landscape. He is the host of the Wolf of All Streets podcast, and we'll be talking about his views. Welcome back to the show, Scott. Good to see you as always.
Thanks so much for having me back, David. Really looking forward to it.
You got your finger on the pulse on all things crypto. I encourage people to check out Scott's show, link down below. He's got a lot of good daily updates on the crypto markets and news. Tell us about the news you're following this week and the most important and exciting news moving markets.
I think you hinted at some of them. I think the Coinbase news is obviously the biggest. And interestingly, it came out of nowhere. There was really no anticipation, no conversation in advance of Coinbase being added to the S&P 500. And as Brian Armstrong made clear, it's not like they just became the number 500 company in the S&P 500. They're actually in the top 50 because they're so large and so powerful and have done so exceptionally well. So a really pleasant surprise, I think, for the crypto industry to see Coinbase added there. And this comes on the back of other big Coinbase news, which is that last week they acquired Deribit, which for those in the United States who don't know, is actually by many, many multiples the largest options exchange and derivatives exchange for crypto in the world, trading crypto futures, much larger than the CME or any of the others that offer that. So Coinbase really making huge moves to dominate all over the world, not just in the United States. And you may have also seen news just a couple of weeks ago that Coinbase rumored to be applying for a bank charter. So it's very clear that them, alongside Robinhood and some others in the United States, are looking to become the Charles Schwabs of the future, adding the full suite of financial services. And I think that's really what's coming. Coinbase did have a hiccup this week, obviously, with a leak of some user data. But I think that will just be a bump in the road. That's pretty standard practice for any financial institution at this point. But Coinbase, the biggest news, we do have quite a few stories that sort of piggyback alongside that as well.
Shares of Coinbase up more than 30% over the last 5 sessions. Like you mentioned, the stock dropped 7.2% on Thursday on the revelation that a hack expected to cost the company $400 million. There's no reports of people losing money. It's just customer leaks. I wonder if this is a big deal in terms of breaching trust for the certain centralized exchanges of the world.
I think there's a bit of that, but like I said, this really isn't really a crypto story. This is an everything story. What happened is that it was some email addresses, and names. As you said, there was no hack of funds, no private keys, nothing was put at risk. But if you're in crypto and live in the United States, like myself, you probably get 4 or 5 text messages a day from phishing scams saying, hey, your Coinbase account has been hacked. Your Gemini account has lost its 2FA. Some of these exchanges I've never even had an account on, and I get texts trying to phish for me to click on links. So it was reported that last month alone, roughly $40 million were stolen from Coinbase users in phishing attacks. So that's not unique to Coinbase. It's not Coinbase's fault. This is not entirely different than when you get a scam email or something saying that, you know, someone's logged into your bank account or that somebody's hacked your phone account. This is how SIM swaps happen. Sadly, when you have a lot of employees that aren't getting paid very much, and these were employees of Coinbase in foreign countries, it's very easy for a bad actor to approach them and say, here's $5,000, give me some user information, right? It's more than they're making in 2 months. The incentives are misaligned. This happens all over the place. Like I said, I've been SIM swapped twice because I'm in crypto. You know, T-Mobile, people were able to either social engineer me or pay somebody off to just switch my SIM number over. It happens all the time in all financial services and industries.
So this is from Brian Armstrong. Let me just pull up the news here. Actually, before we talk about what Brian Armstrong said in a recent interview, let's also talk about Mike Novogratz's Galaxy that debuted on the NASDAQ actually today as we're speaking. So listing on the NASDAQ and Toronto Stock Exchange at $23.50 per share after a lengthy transition period. My general question is whether or not there's going to be more capital inflows into some of these exchanges and asset managers and just crypto stocks away from the underlying assets, Ethereum, tokens, Bitcoin, whatever the case may be.
I think yes. And I think there's different classes of investors that look for exposure to this asset class. Obviously, those who are more stock driven, looking for investments, may look to these companies for exposure. Those who are more libertarian or believe that Bitcoin is a way to rage against the machine or to hedge against government insanity, they're going to still buy Bitcoin and not buy Galaxy stock. Yeah. I think the Galaxy story is big because it's taken so long and they finally felt that they had a green light to go public. Under the last administration, certainly under Lena Khan, we really saw IPO activity, mergers and acquisitions somewhat die in the United States. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing so many companies now in crypto and beyond finally feel comfortable with these listings. eToro also listed this week. That was actually a bigger story because of how it went. It was initially going to be at $45 a share. They ended up, I think, raising 6 million, selling 6 million shares or 6 million at 52. So really oversubscribed, much more popular than people anticipated. And at the end of the first day of trading, it was all the way at 67. I can't remember the last time, crypto or otherwise, that we had an IPO that successful that actually, didn't see a dump on the first day, had more buying appetite than selling on the way up. Yeah. So I think that this is a signal that all these companies that have been waiting for years to go public, they're going to probably see what happened with eToro and get really excited and start to make their plans.
Well, Mike Novogratz said the same thing as you just did. I think we're at the beginning of what will be a trend for other crypto companies going public. He said, is this trend a signal for market sentiment for the crypto space overall, though? Is it a leading, lagging indicator? Is it a market top, perhaps?
I hope it's not a market top. Anything could happen in this market. And I think that there's been a period here where crypto's obviously been a bit beholden to what's happening with the macro, or more specifically, what Trump decides to truth on Truth Social on any given day. But yes, I think that this is just the beginning, honestly. I think quite a few of these will go public. It's a good time for them to do so. And once again, not really a crypto story, because I think that that's going to be true of a number of industries also looking to do this while they have a favorable window with regulators. But I do think, obviously, that they're seeing the success of the Bitcoin spot ETFs. They're seeing institutional news on a daily basis of adoption. I mean, just 2 days ago, JP Morgan settled their first, tokenized transfer. JP Morgan's been one of the most dismissive of crypto organizations. Well, certainly their CEO, Jamie Dimon, not the company itself. Yeah. And, we have BlackRock at over $3 billion in their Biddle fund. I mean, the biggest institutions in the world are finding ways to gain exposure, and obviously everybody's on notice.
Before we continue with the video, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Delete Me. Your personal information is probably online right now. Your full name, home address, phone number, sitting on data broker websites that anybody can access or buy. It's unsettling, but that's exactly why I use Delete Me. Delete Me helps remove your private information from hundreds of data broker websites. I've been using it for months, and every time I check my privacy report, I'm shocked by how many places had my data and relieved that it's gone now. Getting started is simple. Submit your info, and in about a week or so, you'll get a personal report showing where your data was found and what was removed. And it's not just one and done. Delete Me keeps scanning and removing your data throughout the year. Go to joindeleteme.com/DavidLin and use promo code DavidLin at checkout. Link down below, or scan the QR code here on screen and get 20% off of all U.S. plans today. Take your privacy back seriously before somebody else does. This is what Brian Armstrong said. I was talking about that earlier. He said, we're very happy to be included in the S&P 500. It now means that crypto is here to stay. He said, it's going to be part of everybody's 401k. He said crypto is now going to be part of everybody's 401k. Now, I wonder, going back to your earlier point about different types and classes of investors, What place does a company like Coinbase have in your 401k versus Bitcoin? In other words, why would you buy a Coinbase stock or a Galaxy stock versus Bitcoin?
Well, there's people who want broader exposure to the industry. Sometimes the stocks like MicroStrategy, for example, is a higher beta play on Bitcoin. If you're extremely bullish on Bitcoin, you might be even more bullish on the upside of a miner or MicroStrategy stock. Coinbase offers much broader exposure than just Bitcoin, obviously, if you believe in the rest of the asset class, Ethereum and the long tail of altcoins. You're sort of gaining exposure there. You're gaining exposure to their entire custody business, which obviously custody is the bulk of these ETFs. So Coinbase, like I said, I think becomes a full suite of financial tools and becomes, as big as a Schwab down the road. And I think a lot of people might be betting on this. Brian Armstrong's point was a little bit more interesting, and I think it was a little bit tongue in cheek because there's so many people who are anti-crypto, said they would never own it, said they would never have exposure to it. And this is forced exposure because every investor with a 401k, every big institution obviously has exposure to the S&P 500. So I don't really think he's saying, hey, all these people are now going to take a serious look at Coinbase because we're in the S&P 500. He's saying that anyone who owns an index of the S&P 500 now owns Coinbase and therefore has some exposure to crypto and to Bitcoin, whether they like it or not. And I think that was sort of a poking back at those who've been dismissive.
Okay, that's important to note, actually, for any investor out there who's not directly exposed to crypto. Well, if you buy the SPX, you are now indirectly, although it's probably not a significant portion of the S&P 500 yet, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. All right, well, let's talk about market sentiment and the direction of the crypto space overall. You do a lot of interviews and podcasts on your own show, Scott. And again, I encourage people to check out Scott Melker's show. Link down below. A lot of good daily updates. What have people been telling you? What is the overall sentiment now versus, let's say, a year ago?
I would say it's actually interesting. So obviously the election played a huge role in sentiment around crypto because there was a fear that it would be 4 more years of the same, of the SEC and other regulators attacking the industry. They were literally suing every major company in the United States that was involved in crypto. Those have all been dropped. And we have a president who's very pro-crypto. His family is participating in crypto, for better or for worse, and has signed executive orders around strategic Bitcoin reserves. I think that as far as the legislative, regulatory, and administrative environment, you almost have to pinch yourself to believe how favorable it is, especially because it was just so horrendous. And really, people thought that the industry might exit the United States entirely. Certainly, companies that were building in crypto went abroad to more favorable regulatory areas like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Singapore, Hong Kong, even. So I think that the environment is extremely bullish. That doesn't mean that people were always bullish on price, though. We had this situation for quite a while where Bitcoin had this huge, very explainable run because of the institutionalization and the narratives around it, and BlackRock and the ETFs and all these things. And then you had sort of this wild, degenerate, speculative casino in the meme coin world that many of you have probably heard about, that Trump certainly participated in with his own meme coin. But everything in the middle really wasn't seeing much action. In fact, the bulk of the crypto market, the larger caps even, were just sort of bleeding out for a very long time, for years, really, as you take a look. And what I find interesting is that since Liberation Day, not only did Bitcoin act like the best hedge fund in the world because it didn't see the same downside as the stock market, and it wildly outperformed to the upside. Remember, the S&P, the Qs, they're a few percent above where they were on Liberation Day. Bitcoin was at 82,000, now trading at 104,000. So wildly outperforming and didn't see the same drop. But what was interesting is on this push up from the mid 90s, Ethereum went up 40%. That's been dying against Bitcoin for years. And as a result, what we usually see is if there's some real interest in Ethereum, all altcoins start to move. So this was the first time that we saw Bitcoin go up, but altcoins went up more. And so I think that opened a lot of people's eyes. It really says there's new money here because that's not money trickling down from Bitcoin if they're both going up. So as you're showing right there, Bitcoin dominance fell off a cliff as Bitcoin was going up. That's like seeing a unicorn on the moon.
Yeah, that's what happened on May 8th, May 7th. What was that? Was there a specific event? Yeah.
There was no specific event. So what you're looking at there is basically that obviously Ethereum is the second largest coin by market cap. And when it finally made a move up, it dramatically affected the dominance of Bitcoin, which once again fell off a cliff. But you saw altcoins move all across the board. I mean, things that seemed to be dead, dinosaurs, that doesn't happen unless there's a lot of new money pouring in. That's not just a washing machine of Bitcoin to other coins, because Bitcoin was catching a bid and going up as well. So if you've been here for previous cycles and you've seen truly when crypto gets very bullish, that's the kind of action you see. And this is the first time in the past 2 weeks that we've seen that.
How does this particular move in the altcoin space right now in the last 2 weeks compare to what happened in 2021 when something similar first started happening?
So I would say that this is like the early beginnings of those moves, right? Back then, obviously, Bitcoin dominance really, really fell off a cliff. You can see it right there on the chart.
Yeah.
So imagine if what you just showed over on the right, that tiny little move, turns into what you're seeing on the left. That would be the comparison.
Right. Yeah, and keep in mind, 2021 was bullish for Bitcoin as well. It wasn't like Bitcoin collapsed, and I think
That's
the
right.
narrative back in the day, well, back in the day, 4 years seems like a lifetime ago for the crypto space. But I remember in 2021, people were complaining about how Bitcoin is inferior to other altcoins precisely because it underperformed during that specific bull market, and the altcoiners were saying, well, there's no place for Bitcoin. Why not just buy some of the uh, you know, um, meme coins or Ethereum. But over time, as Bitcoin dominance rose over the last kind of bear market, that narrative kind of died down a little bit. Now, how can you evaluate a statement like that? Let's say somebody's new coming into the space and they say, well, why hold Bitcoin versus just something that's moving more right now?
I view them as separate asset classes, and I think that
Okay.
you should own Bitcoin no matter what, regardless of any of that. It's the best place to start. It's the easiest to understand. You simply dollar cost average, and your Sharpe ratio goes up. It improves your portfolio, and you make money over time. I think there's a lot of reasons to own Bitcoin beyond just the investment aspect, but I think that's the simplest play. I think even those who go pretty far down the risk spectrum in crypto are majority in Bitcoin. Even me, when it's full blown alt season and I'm looking at all these things and I'm actively trading and participating, I'm trying to keep 50 to 70% in Bitcoin, and it's over 70% when things are bad. Right. So I think that Bitcoin is sort of like the benchmark. If we had to make a comparison, maybe you say that's owning the S&P, the SPY as an index, and then the other 30% of your portfolio, you take some shots at speculative individual stocks that you want to, but you wouldn't want to put all of your money into a few speculative tech stocks. And that's the easiest comparison, I think, for sort of TradFi investors.
I just want to bring, since you brought up the SPX, this is the SPX versus Bitcoin. People have been talking about a decoupling event for quite some time. We kind of saw that in early April when the Liberation Day happened. Bitcoin went up and the SPX went down, but the correlation kind of reconverged. Now that we have companies like Coinbase and Galaxy being listed on stock exchanges and Coinbase joined the S&P 500, I wonder if this correlation is just going to be here to stay. Because like you said earlier, the S&P is now going to be partly just Bitcoin or Bitcoin proxies, right?
Yeah, I think with time, the inevitable part of institutionalization is dampened volatility and slightly more correlation for sure. So I think that those will rise, but it will be interesting to see if we see a true S&P correction, kind of like we thought we were getting there, and Bitcoin can outperform. So we saw a brief hint of that. I mean, listen, in my mind, Bitcoin has all kinds of narratives, and it just doesn't really trade necessarily like a tech stock. It doesn't really trade like digital gold, even though it has superior properties to gold. I just view Bitcoin as Bitcoin. It's largely been uncorrelated over history, and that does look quite correlated when you're looking at that chart right there as of late. And I think that maybe that's more of a story about global liquidity and the liquidity situation than it is about anything else, because about 3 or 4 months ago, we really saw a turn in M2. It started to rise dramatically after having one of those brief periods of a dip. And usually the price of Bitcoin and even other risk assets starts to rise dramatically at about 3 month lag from global liquidity. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing here as well.
And Scott, have you and or your guests looked at what may happen to tech stocks and the broad equity markets overall? Presumably, if you're bullish on the alts, then maybe you're bullish on all risk assets.
I think that's a better argument that once you get beyond Bitcoin, those are much more susceptible to sort of how tech moves and certainly how global liquidity is moving. But I do think there's going to be these moments of wild outperformance from altcoins, but they're usually very, very brief. You kind of have to get your money back into Bitcoin. It's much more of a trader thing than an investor thing. But yes, I would say that you'll see those. If we really go risk off, you definitely see altcoins perform a lot worse than Bitcoin.
How has institutional adoption of Bitcoin over the last couple of years changed its volatility profile, you think?
The volatility has dampened dramatically. I think it used to be about 3 times as volatile in the S&P. Now it's less than 2 times as volatile in the S&P, and that's all really been in line with when the ETFs were approved. Like I said, the more institutional money, the more Wall Street money, the more pensions and conservative money that are just sort of long-term investors and holders get involved, the less volatility there's going to be. Probably good for the asset class maturing. Not as good for maybe the traders using leverage trying to catch big moves.
Do you see a new theme emerging for the altcoin and DeFi space? I remember in 2021, NFTs were hot. Uh, we had gamify as a theme. A lot of these companies kind of just went away since the bear market. Is there a new theme, or do you see some of these themes reemerging?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and I think that the best of those themes will reemerge as well. The metaverse feels relatively dead. I remember when people were paying $2 million for a plot of land next to Snoop's mansion in the metaverse, knowing full well that they could just make more land anytime they wanted. So like you look back at those speculative bubbles and it was just obviously insanity. That said, GameFi also was sort of a bubble at that time, but we have AAA games now being built with blockchain aspects like Gunzilla. So that is actually happening at this point. But I would say the biggest narratives right now, obviously, are anything to do with stable coins, because I think that's the lowest hanging fruit for legislation. But then the tokenization of real world assets. I mentioned BITL before, BlackRock's tokenized treasuries. That's, I think, over 3 billion already in AUM very, very quickly. And you have Larry Fink on the roadshow talking about the tokenization of everything, that being the future of settlement. As I said, JP Morgan is actively using this, as are large institutions. So that is the future, is effectively tokenizing securities and other assets to make for faster, quicker, cheaper settlement.
Are you personally seeing anything with, like, what personally interests you the most, Scott?
Honestly, right now, as a trader, I was very bullish on Ethereum at the lows. Went back to the 2018 prices and I bought a lot and got very excited about that. People thought I was insane, which is my favorite signal. And that was $1,400, and here we are at $2,500, $2,600, $2,700, just in a matter of weeks. So I've been looking at it more sort of technically right now. As far as narratives, nothing is more compelling to me right now than Bitcoin. I really think that Bitcoin's going to continue to grind up with this adoption. And then really, unless you're in this 24/7, 365, it's so hard to pick those unicorns that win when you go further down the risk curve. So I would say a very natural strategy, if you want to go beyond Bitcoin, is just to gain exposure to ETH and maybe Solana, maybe a couple of the other foundational layer ones that are new, and Aptos or Sui and AVAX, things like that. Because even if you don't catch that thing that's built on that chain that does 100x, the value will accrue down to that chain, and it might 2 or 3x, which is still an incredible return. So I think that I'm just trying to see where the narratives fall. All those things you said, NFTs, metaverse, gaming, those are going to find a chain where they really bubble up, and I want to own those chains.
Ethereum has disappointed a lot of people in the last year. I know this recent run-up was new, but we can talk about that. But longer term, is there a future for ETH versus the other coins that you brought up, like Solana, for example, Cardano? Arguably both superior in their own ways for what they do. And then people will say, well, ETH is also kind of susceptible to Vitalik's idiosyncrasies, let's put it that way. So, a lot of risk there. What do you say to that?
I think that's all fair, but that reminds me of when Elon Musk went on Joe Rogan and smoked weed and Tesla dumped, and then that was the dead bottom, and Tesla went way back up for many years, right? They've had some reconfiguring at the Ethereum Foundation, for better or for worse. So I think a lot of people at least are waiting and seeing what happens there. Obviously, if you're truly into crypto for decentralization, having to wonder who's leading the foundation is a bit of a head scratcher. But I do think that still the bulk of the TVL, the bulk of the developers, that still is on Ethereum over all of those other chains. And it is the natural second to Bitcoin. So I really do think when you look at where these institutions are participating, BlackRock is tokenizing billions of dollars of real world assets on Ethereum, right? And so if you think, and Ethereum has an ETF, right? And while that has not performed particularly well, BlackRock was at the SEC last week trying to add staking to the Ethereum ETFs, which would give them a yield, right? And so I think that there are a lot of powerful narratives for ETH. I think the foundation and Vitalik certainly got in the way. And I do think that, it was a little slower and more expensive than a Solana where the meme coins were going. And it just kind of got caught in the middle of that barbell I described before. But if that barbell is ceasing to exist, I think Ethereum will do exceptionally well.
Speaking of Solana, let's take a look at Solana. Big run up again, but maybe not to the same extent as ETH. Oh, this is the market cap.
There's
Anyway,
market cap. Yeah.
yeah. So let's just talk about what's in store for Solana. Why can't I get a Solana spot chart? Anyway, you get the point.
Yeah.
Some stable coins are being built on Sol. I wonder what the main use case for Sol is going to be in the future. I spoke to the Solana Foundation not too long ago, and they're actually making the technology even more efficient. The throughput's going to be even faster. So,
Fired answer.
new applications.
I think that everyone will try everything on all of these chains, to be quite frank. So I think that Solana has obviously captured the zeitgeist of the crypto degenerates, and it's a great place for launching things. Launching meme coins, launching NFTs, all those things are faster, cheaper on Solana. So it really has eaten Ethereum's lunch, I think, in that regard. The question is, how much institutional adoption will we see of Solana? There are definitely hints of it happening. As you said, I think the three or more top stablecoins are all available on Solana and have significant volume and TVL there. So I think that Solana is a victim of its own success on the degenerate side to some degree, so needs to see a bit of adults in the room building on it. But I do think that's happening and that they'll do exceptionally well. There's nothing specific I can point to, but Fire Dancer, what you alluded to before, is that major upgrade. And, if you listen to the Solana Foundation and their leaders, they definitely think that this can be the one chain to rule them all, that you can do everything on Solana.
Okay. And then finally, some of my viewers want to talk about XRP. So here is the ongoing lawsuit against the XRP versus SEC. Some new developments today. The cryptocurrency, which has surged in recent weeks on growing legal clarity and wider market momentum, is now facing turbulence as the court ruling stalls its legal resolution with the SEC. This came in, just today. So here's the XRP chart. Obviously, it hasn't done as well as ETH in the last couple of weeks. What's the narrative around XRP? Are we just waiting for legal clarity here?
I mean, it's funny. It hasn't done as well as ETH in the last couple of weeks, but ETH was going down when what was happening there on the XRP chart on the left was going up, right? So you went from 40 cents to $3.40 or something, in a matter of months. So that's how crypto works. Like you get the big move, and then people cycle, they get bored and they cycle into the next thing. And I think that we've seen that, but XRP did have that monster move. I think regardless of people's feelings about XRP, it's very polarizing. It was well-deserved because they got a lot more legal clarity. It was declared not a security effectively. We have ETFs being filed for XRP. We saw it mentioned by Trump when he talked about the strategic digital asset stockpile. So there was a lot of, I think we could say there was a lot of weight holding it down, sort of like a balloon being pushed underwater. And when all of that was released, with all that clarity, you saw a big bid there. That said, they're going to need another narrative now to be the next big mover, right? And so now there's a little lack of clarity, but it's really just some nuance, I think, on how much their penalty will be, which has come down, and a few other things. I don't think there's anything fundamentally holding XRP back right now. Their community is very, very passionate and excited about everything going on there.
Is there any coin or chain that you think will be next in line as a universal medium of exchange? I know we kind of have this conversation every year, especially hot as a topic in 2021, the last bull market. Have stable coins kind of taken over that narrative completely, or is there something else?
Yes. There's absolutely no reason you would use any token that has volatility for payments. You just wouldn't. It's not rational. XRP was extremely fast and cheap when it came out. I think it led the way, but most people in the world, which is ironic because, those who buy Bitcoin is against the United States dollar because of hyperinflation. But really, the killer use case for crypto has been tokenizing United States dollars. And once you can do that and move them just as fast and cheap, why would you move anything else?
I think a lot of people agree with you there. A lot of people may be disappointed in your message right now because, a stablecoin is essentially fiat just on the blockchain. People really want to see a pure play crypto being used as a form of payment, but I don't know if there's still hope for that right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be stable coins, but I think there's a marriage there. Your savings account is Bitcoin, and then you use dollars when you need to, and it's a faster, better way to do that. And I think that really are the two killer use cases at this moment.
Tim Draper was on the news recently. He gave a forecast, and I'll just read you what he said, and let's maybe get your reaction to it. 10 years, something like that. It may be a little less. He was talking about within a decade, Bitcoin will replace US dollar dominance, become the standard currency, undermining the international economy. Once I can buy my food, my clothing, my shelter, pay my taxes all in Bitcoin. And it's a way better way to collect taxes. For sure, there won't be any reason to hold on to any dollars, and Bitcoin will be the primary source of owning wealth. He also said Bitcoin will rise to 250K. We'll get to that in a bit by the end of 2025. After a decade, it will be infinity against the dollar because there won't be a dollar. All right, I'll get you to respond to that.
Hyperbolic. I loved him. He's been passionate and mostly right the entire time. He's the guy who bought all that Bitcoin from the United States government in an auction, long-term believer, exceptionally smart, has nailed many trends. I don't think that the dollar hyperinflates away in 10 years.
Yeah.
I just don't. But interestingly, this used to sound crazy when people would say that Bitcoin would replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. You have Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock and the largest asset manager on the planet, saying the exact same thing if the dollar continues on its course and we continue to inflate the debt as massively as we have. So that's become a mainstream narrative. It's not as crazy as it once sounded. 250K this year, totally possible. I mean, a 2.5x for Bitcoin in 6 months. I have no idea when that will happen, but that does happen with Bitcoin. That's very within the norm. I mean, if you look at the 2020 lows at COVID all the way up to the next bull market high, I mean, basically went from 3,000 to 69,000, 17 times. So to go 2.5x, I think from the current level would not be a big deal. That's at infinity versus the dollar in 10 years. I have my doubts. And to be quite frank, if that happens, it might be that we're living in a dystopian Mad Max future, taking the truck to gas town to exchange for water. So I don't know that I want to live in the future where all fiat currency hyperinflates in a 10-year period.
I don't think they have internet in the Mad Max movie either. So I don't know
That's
how
right.
Bitcoin will work. All right, great. Well, final question that leads to my final segue. So 250 Bitcoin, you said is possible. What's the consensus view on your show? What have people been telling you?
I think everybody wants to be conservative after being caught with their pants down with hyperbolic overestimations in past markets. A lot of 120 to 150.
Okay.
I think is sort of like the consensus on cycle highs. But listen, you got people that are pretty convinced we'll be at 1 million before this bull market ends. So, you've got the full spectrum still.
What does that mean, this bull market? Like this bull market meaning like this year or like a multi-year bull market? Like what does that mean?
Crypto tends to move in 4-year cycles. Whether that's broken or not is up for debate. I would say it's more broken than not, but usually you get these humongous moves to the upside. It way overshoots. Then you get the 75-80% retrace and you start again and you go higher and higher and higher.
All right.
And so there's some people who believe that that's the target before we see another real bear market.
Well, tell us where we can follow your work and kind of the trends you're focusing on right now on your own show.
Sure. So my show is like yours, primarily interviews. I try to talk to the smartest people in the industry and glean as much alpha from them as possible. I do that every single day on YouTube at 9 a.m. It's YouTube/Scott Melker. You can also find all of this on X/Scott Melker and on Crypto Town Hall, which is the largest crypto spaces on X. And we do that every day. Myself, Mario Knopfel, and Rand Nooner at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every single weekday on X. And, those are panels of 8 to 10 people. So we get a lot of opinions on all of these hot topics on a daily basis.
Amazing. And what are some of these hot topics that people are bringing up in the past couple of weeks?
I think right now we pretty much nailed them today. And to be honest, for the last few weeks, since Liberation Day, Trump and the United States and tariffs has been dominating the narrative even for crypto. It's hard to look at anything else when you see what markets do based on every comment they make.
Excellent. All right, we'll put the links down below. So check out Scott Melker and his program there. Very much enjoy having you back on the show, Scott. Take care for now. We'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.